At Sierra, discover top workout gear at incredible prices, which might lead to another discovery. Your headphones haven't been connected this whole time. Awkward. Discover top brands at unexpectedly low prices. Sierra, let's get moving.
Build a routine with Ollie that supports your wellness needs, like getting your daily vitamins and minerals with Ollie's multi-gummies, or keeping your mood upbeat with all the vitamin D in Hello Happy. Give your gut health some support with probiotics, and wake up feeling refreshed after taking Ollie Sleep. Do wellness on your terms. Find Ollie at a Walmart or Target near you or at ollie.com. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
I'm Stephen Metcalf, and this is the Slate Culture Gabfest. Noah Wyle lures us into the Pitt edition. It's Wednesday, February 5th, 2025. On today's show, Noah Wyle returns to the ER in The Pitt, a TV show that over the course of its 15-episode details in a kind of sort of real time, a 15-hour shift in an emergency room. The show's on Max. And then the movie September 5th retells the story of the hostage crisis at the 1972 Munich Olympics, this time from the perspective of the ABC News crew already on hand to cover the games. It stars Peter Sarsgaard, Ben Chaplin, and John Magaro. It's been nominated for a Best Original Screenplay Oscar. For that segment, we'll be joined by Amy Nicholson, a film critic at the LA Times. And finally, in the face of the re-election of Donald Trump, is cruelty now hip? We discuss the Cruel Kids Table, a New York Magazine piece about suave, young, good-looking fascist and fascist-adjacent young people celebrating the recent election results. Joining me today are Julia Turner. Hello, Julia.
Hello, Steve.
Hey, and of course, Dana Stevens, film critic of Slate. Hey, Dana.
Hey.
Let's make a show. All right. Noah Wyle got famous the first time around playing Dr. John Carter on ER, the unkillably lucrative NBC franchise back from the great heyday of broadcast network TV. The Pitt, his new show, is about an emergency room at a beleaguered Pittsburgh hospital. It's been called ER Meets 24, a line that's just too apt not to plagiarize. The new Max series takes place in an overfull, underfunded, staffed with good-looking, concerned caregivers, played by nice-looking actors. Emergency room, what's not to love? It stars, as I said, Wiley in a Patrick Dempsey-like reboot. He was so fresh-faced in ER and young. Now he's a grizzled, wizened veteran, Dr. Michael Robbie Rabinovich. He presides over an emergency room filled with society's sick and wounded, as well as young trainees in the medical profession. The show stars Wiley, Tracy Ifichor, and a host of others. In the clip, we're going to hear Wiley talking a colleague pretty literally off the ledge right at the beginning of episode 1 by reminding him what a drag their chosen careers are. Let's listen.
Had a guy come in, hit by a drunk driver in a crosswalk, 39-year-old vet. Survived 3 tours without a scratch. I spent the last 2 hours coding it.
That's always a rough way to end the night.
Must have had a reason at one time to keep coming back, but I can't think of it right now.
Because this is the job that keeps on giving. Nightmares, ulcers, suicidal tendencies. Besides, if you jump on my shift, that's just rude, man.
Julia, let's start with you. Did you fall into the pit?
Yeah, I fell way into the pit, you guys. I started this feeling like, oh, okay, it's fine. They're rebooting. Well, they're not rebooting ER because that's a subject of legal dispute. But here it is, a nice medical procedural. Our listeners know I love procedurals. I do. I'm not a medical procedural person. I did watch ER in the heyday, and like it was on in my high school and college years, and we would all gather in one of the snack bars on Thursday nights to see what George Clooney was up to. So I had that relationship with the original text, but I think literally never watched a minute of Grey's Anatomy in my life. I've watched about half an hour's worth of House. The medical procedural is not my flavor typically. And in initially watching this, I thought, this is kind of rote. we're meeting a lot of people in the ER. We're meeting some of the new little baby docs, racked with fear about the huge responsibility they're taking on over people's lives. We're in the comfortable hands of Noah Wyle. Ooh, too many close-ups of big bloody wounds. Like, all right, I can see that this works and is going to be a fine show, but it's not a show for me because I don't need to watch everybody's torsos getting impaled or whatever. But then I watched 3 episodes, and then I heard that the 4th episode was really good, so I watched that. And then even though it was like the middle of the night, I kept clicking through to next and watch the next one. Like I got lost in this world. And I feel like, the key thing that's structurally unusual about it, and I'm very curious to hear whether you guys think it is an asset or a detriment of the show, is this quasi 24 structure, right? Where the episodes are unfurling in semi-real time. And the first episode is the first hour of Noah Wyle's shift, and then the second, and then the third. At first, I thought it was a silly gimmick. I'm actually finding it quite effective. Like, and you can start to see them setting little bellwethers of the things that are going to come in hours 8 and 9 and 10. A lot of people are off to a music festival, guys. I'm not sure how that music festival is going to go. But I really thought structurally it drove tension with great economy. It brings these characters to life, and then it goes some really interesting places. That 4th episode, which is really about a death and how death can be experienced in these medical settings, I thought it was beautifully written and acted and really moving. Are you guys just going to laugh me off of my procedural chair, or did the pit get you too?
I mean, I'm kind of with you. I didn't fall quite as deep as you, I think. And I'm in the middle of that episode that you're talking about, that is about these 2 middle-aged siblings kind of experiencing their father's death and deciding about his end-of-life care. It is a great storyline, and I'm already anticipating that it's going to tear me apart when he actually goes. I think I agree with what Alan Sepinwall wrote about this in his review of the series, which is that the show's biggest innovation is its biggest weakness. I don't really think the hour-by-hour thing works in terms of character development very logically. It does work for suspense, obviously, to sort of accompany a medical case hour by hour. So on the side of, following the patient stories, that adds tension and suspense. But in terms of the character interactions, it just really doesn't make that much sense that people that have known each other for 4 hours have already had a story arc to their relationship. And something about what that temporal structure does to the viewer's perception of the relationships, it makes you have to forgive a lot of things that just really don't make any logical sense, right? And to sort of assume that people over the course of 4 hours get to know each other and recognize their differences and similarities in a way that you would not do with a coworker until you'd known them for months. That said, there are a lot of really well-defined characters in this. It takes a long time to get to know them all. And the first episode is an absurd amount of kind of backstories to establish who all the various residents and new arrivals in the ER are. But after you get a grasp on who those people are, they're quite well individuated and differentiated and all likable in their own ways. So it is a world that I want to stay in. What about you, Steve?
Yeah, I'm pretty deep in the pit, I got to say. There's a wonderful moment, and came very early on, right at the beginning of Philip Roth's career, before he became this, sort of priapic totem to, middle-age entitled priapism. But when he was a young, tender man, he read a novella called Goodbye, Columbus. And there's a key moment in it where this very wise moment too, where the young man, who's the narrator, who's Roth's alter ego, is falling in love with a sort of fancier girl. And he goes to her country club, and she's swimming, and I think dusk is falling and it's dark. I haven't read this in 30 years, so my recollection might not be wrong, but it's an extraordinary moment where she dives into the pool and swims away from him, and she keeps lingering at the other end of the pool and then coming back, but then immediately going and lingering at the other end of the pool. And it's in the course of that separation that he falls in love with her. He realizes he's in love with her. And it's this wonderful open question. Is he being manipulated by her consciously, or is it just one of those extraordinary moments of young person kismet. I had that experience with the show that I would get to the end of it. And then I had trouble at the end of, I think it was episode 2, getting 3 to boot automatically. It didn't give me a skip to the next episode. And I'm like clicking buttons maniacally. I'm like, why is she still at the other end of the board? I need more Dr. whatever the fuck his name is. I've got a fascism lodged in my ribs. Take the fascism out. Strong, benign white male figure.
They do literally do a fasciotomy in this, and I was like, I wish a fasciotomy was something different, and Noah Wyle could do it to everyone.
They also perform a procedure called a crike, which is, I guess, similar to a tracheotomy in some way. You sort of
a full crikey.
And they say, and I had to look up what that was on Wikipedia. It's short for crikeotomy something. But the amount the word crike is said in that one scene is just so awesome. I just left it just wanting to have a crike so I could say the word.
And
crike.
later on, there's a scene where they try to avoid having a crike, and they do all kinds of other stuff to not have a crike. Yes, the medical jargon is well done, I think. But my version of that's a lot less poetic and does not involve a scintillating recap of Roth's career and or pan of him, is that I just found myself when I was brushing my teeth last night being like, what are my pals in the pit doing? I want to go back there. So like, it just works as TV, like in a very old fashioned way. I also think that what's interesting, I mean, I skipped directly from ER to this show. No relation, and didn't watch a lot of the ones in between. So I can't speak to how they handle it. But the degree to which this is about the fact that we're a failed society is also part of what makes it compelling, or at least made it feel different than the 1990s version of it. To me, it's about healthcare. It's about the healthcare crisis. It's about the impossible position that puts doctors in. It's about the impossible positions that puts families in. The circumstances that bring people to the ER are also indicative of the various failures of our society around housing and economics and insurance and caregiving crises. And I mean, it's one after the other, to the point where it might feel after school specially or something, but just there's a deftness of execution and characterization in these short moments that I don't know. It's a really good show. It's just a really good show.
It's really good TV. And it's at a moment when, like, hearkening back to the comforts of network are really timely. And as you say, Julie, it's totally timely. I mean, the storyline that's about to unfold over the next 4 years, or God knows, 400 years, is the relationship of a derelict society's chaos to those people who, in an institution that's in tatters because of that dereliction, nonetheless have their finger in the dike on all of our behalfs. Right. And that is exactly what this show is about. This point of contact between all the violences of American society and the underfunded institutions, designed to deal with those violences, barely holding up against them. It's a form of heroism, Dana, I think we're kind of ripe for. Are you really not? Are you going back in the pit? You don't know. It's not homework anymore. You're going to watch it.
Oh yeah, I'm definitely gonna keep watching it. It is a little bit backgroundy. Like, it's not the most. It's in a strange way for a show that, as Julia says, has close up after close up of scalpels going into flesh. Like, if you're squeamish about that, do not watch this show, because it gives you no warning that you're about to see a completely flayed human limb or something like that.
It's really gruesome, yeah.
But really, it is a show about the humanity of the doctors and about bedside manner. I mean, as much as it's about, medicine and following the tension of are these patients going to make it and are they going to be okay? It's about how to maintain your humanity as somebody who's witnessing that much suffering at that scale in that in an environment that is as dysfunctional as the medical system. So.
And are you guys like me, kind of crushed out on Noah Wyle on this? Like, what's going on inside me right now? I'm having like a midlife crisis with his grizzled face.
I mean, Noah Wyle is great. I feel like I have a crush on Dr. Mohan, like slow-mo Mohan, her narrative of trying to take care of, figure out how to take care of patients and how to have time to be human in the crushing maw of the structures that they're in. I mean, I really I'm talking myself into liking it even more than I liked it coming in, because I think the combination between like old-fashioned TV storytelling that's not too fancy and the subject matter, which is basically how do you maintain your humanity and your sanity in the face of the unthinkable, feels very pertinent and very relevant, and not too cute and not too coy, and quite sincere in its exploration of the human drama of that. I mean, it just takes its characters quite seriously, and takes the patients quite seriously, and takes the viewer seriously in the direct, emotional way that just works and feels apposite to the moment.
All right. Well, the show is on Max. It's called The Pitt. I think we're like the three thumbs are up in varying degrees of uppitude, but Julia and I are pretty into it, and Dana's.
Yeah,
fallen.
I'm in. We're together in the pit.
I love it.
Moshing. We're moshing.
Three moshing vipers. I love it. All right, check it out. Let us know what you think.
Here's a little tip for all the music fans out there. Discover is accepted at 99% of places that take credit cards nationwide. You heard right, 99%. And every time you make a purchase with your card, you automatically earn cash back, which means you could earn rewards for those almost front row seats, ride shares to the venue, even that concert merch you've had your eye on since it dropped. If all of that sounds like music to your ears, remember, it pays to discover. Based on the February 2024 Nielsen report, learn more at discover.com/credit card.
All right. Well, in 1972, the summer of 1972, I was in between second and third grade, coming into my early sentience. And the 1972 Olympics were so iconic to me and remain that way forever. It was Mark Spitz and Olga Korbut Olympics. But of course, something else was going on that my parents shielded me from, which is it's infamously the year of the Munich massacre and the hostage crisis. There's already been a major motion picture about this directed by Steven Spielberg called Munich. Now comes one from a almost entirely different point of view. As I understand it, due to a series of scheduling snafus, I was not able to see September 5th, which we are talking about in part because it's been nominated for Best Original Screenplay. This tells the story, as I understand it, from the point of view of the ABC News producing team and crew that was covering the Olympics already, most notably Runa Arledge, a pioneer in sports broadcasting and live broadcasting and in general. I intend to see the movie, but now I'm going to log off because three smart people are going to talk about it, our two traditional co-hosts. But we're also joined by Amy Nicholson, film critic at the LA Times and host of the Unspooled podcast. Amy, enormous gratitude, but also regret. I'm so sorry. I'm so glad you can fill in for me. And I'm so sorry I don't get to talk to you. So I hope you come back on to discuss something I have seen sometime soon. But thank you.
I hope so too. I guess in the meantime, I'll just fill into every single part of your life. I like your glasses. I like your sweater.
I mean, this got weird fast, but in a really, really intriguing way. But anyway, I can't wait to see the movie because not only do I get to see what sounds like a cool and interesting or at least provocative movie, I then get to come back and listen to this segment. But for now, I'm going to say thanks again and let you guys take it away from here.
All right, so it's Dana taking over the host chair for this one segment. As Steve says, the events of the 1972 Summer Olympics in Munich have already been put on screen, actually not just by Steven Spielberg in Munich in 2005, but also in an Oscar-winning documentary, which I've not yet seen. I really want to, called One Day in September. It won Best Documentary at the Oscars in the year 2000. The events of that year at the Games, which, as we'll talk about, this film, September 5th, covers in a more oblique way than Munich, was an international hostage crisis that unfolded in real time on live television in the Athletes' Village in Munich. A militant Palestinian group called Black September stormed the barracks of the Israeli team, killing 2 athletes immediately, taking another 9 athletes hostage, and creating a day-long drama, which you probably know the history of if you've seen Munich or just know this history. But if you haven't, I will not reveal how it unfolds because, in fact, the characters in this film experience it unfolding in real time without knowing what will happen next. So this time it's a Swiss director, Tim Fellbaum, who's taking on these events. And the way that he frames the events is to set his film entirely in the ABC newsroom in Munich as things are unfolding. We're pretty much claustrophobically confined to that newsroom with a bank of television screens with which we see what's happening, insofar as the characters can glimpse what's happening in the Olympic Village. Amy, I'm going to start with you because you're our visiting film critic. First of all, I just want to know, your own response to this movie, pro or con. What did you feel while watching it? And then if you can spin out a little bit more how Fehlbaum sets this up as a kind of media procedural and a media critique.
Yeah, I enjoyed this film quite a lot once I got into the rhythm of it. Because when you enter this movie and you're in that room as you're describing it, the ABC headquarters with the TVs everywhere, and there's like dramatic shadows coming from the window blinds, and the tinting is a little bit extreme. You're thinking like, is this like a throwback FBI style, like screens everywhere thriller? And then it becomes really interestingly bloodless. A movie about just sort of immediate decisions about people learning what the media landscape is going to look like in real time forever, because we're in a room with some really powerful people. We have Peter Sarsgaard playing Rune Artledge, who was the president of ABC Sports at this moment. He goes on to become the president of ABC News until 1998. He's the guy who, founds what we think of as news in so many ways today. Nightline, 2020, ABC World News Tonight, figuring out how to tell a story when the story can get really grisly, coming up with things like, wow, if we wind up accidentally shooting a live murder, let's just cut to reaction shots. And it's kind of chilling. Like, this is a movie that I think is fascinating in that it's set at a time that predates Network by 4 years, but it feels like it's everything that Howard Beale and Network are yelling about. This society of people, this group of like mind melders who are using TV to almost take the news, the impact out of like violence and turn it into a sporting event, because this is essentially a group of sportsmen in charge of one of the most destructive stories of the 20th century.
One of the things, I'm glad you mentioned Network, because that's the movie it made me think about a lot too, and that's one of my favorite movies. The movie is strangely modest for being about something so huge, both in the constraint of its setting and it's just understated in a lot of ways. The more that I've sat with it and thought about it, the more I love it as a journalism movie. We're so used to journalism movies that are either lionizing the journalistic heroes who risk their life and sanity to reveal wrongdoing and hold powerful people to account, right? They're sort of the spotlight version, highlighting the kind of methodical work it takes for journalism to be at its best. Then there are journalistic satires about how cynical and craven journalists are. And, Network is sort of like an almost operatic version of that, right? Of just like, what are the instincts, the ruthless instincts that drive television and news to the lowest common denominator. What I love about this is it's almost like a combination of the two, that these very sincere journalists who are trying hard to figure out the right thing to do in this completely unprecedented situation, and who are inventing new forms of storytelling on the fly with great kind of technical acuity and inventiveness and, everything you'd want under pressure from someone you are working with on an important technical project, end up just fucking up colossally. Like they make enormous mistakes and they end up just fucking up enormously. And I think part of what maybe makes the movie feel, I don't know, incomplete or small or unsatisfying, or I've spoken with and read pieces from several critics arguing that maybe the film doesn't grapple appropriately with the politics of this incident, especially given current politics, or is almost like too modest for its subject matter. But I ended up kind of loving that, because the journalists are so stuck in their own little storytelling bunker that it's really hard for them to reckon with the full morality of what they're doing, even though they're trying. And at the end of it, they reach very different conclusions about whether what they've done is glorious or a nightmare. And the sort of the notion that when journalists fuck up, it's not because they're merciless and evil, and that they can fuck up even when they're pretty good people who are trying hard and to the best of their ability under great stress. That felt like the truest and hardest lesson of this film, which I ended up really loving.
It's interesting you both mentioned network as a comparison. That would never have occurred to me while watching this, although I guess that the kind of moral questions that the film poses are the same ones as network, but the tone is so completely different. Julia, as you say, this is so much more of a sincere workplace drama in some ways, in which you are pretty much rooting for the people in the newsroom, even as you see them. And sometimes, before you realize that they are committing these huge ethical mistakes, which again, I won't spoil exactly what they are, but they have to do with essentially playing their hand too soon, right? With being too concerned with the heat of the story to think about the implication on people's lives and possibly on the hostage situation itself of what they're showing on screen. So this is balanced in between that All the President's Men style heroicization and something that has a harsher critique of the media, the way that something like Network would be. A movie that it made me think of, and maybe it's just because of the Peter Sarsgaard connection, is Shattered Glass, which is one of my favorite journalism-themed films, and which is also sort of about ethical lapses, but how they can happen within a world where everyone, or almost everyone, is trying their best to tell the truth and figure out what's going on. In fact, Peter Sarsgaard's character is somewhat similar in a way to the wonderful role that he plays in
the Chuck Lane character. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. In Shattered Glass, in that he is, this sort of doggedly moral and professional supervisor who's trying to make sure that the people beneath him are holding themselves to the highest standard, even as those standards keep changing in front of their eyes. So this is also a movie about broadcast history, right? And about technological history. And as I think Manolo Dargis says in the New York Times writing about it, it's a heaven for analog fetishists, right? I mean, there's scene after scene of people figuring out how to tap into a phone line or, smuggling reels of film across barriers they're not supposed to go through so they can be hastily developed. And to think about what it meant to put on real-time news, even sports news, even before the crisis erupts, you see the tension that's happening in the sports room. That's, I think, what the movie is most successful at. I do, when I read the critiques of it, understand how this could be seen as a somewhat politically obtuse or even politically irresponsible could make sense, in that this movie is being filmed and released during a very hot point in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. It's about the moment, essentially, that sort of modern terrorism, as we now know it, erupted into view. And it's not necessarily grappling with the after effects. It is a smart enough movie, though, that it sort of leaves you to think those through for yourself. And the movie that it reminded me of in that sense was United 93. Remember that movie, the Peter Greengrass film about the September 11th flight that goes down, which similarly to this takes place entirely in a sort of tense room of people just hearing about what's going on and trying to solve the crisis in real time and get the news out about it. There's a similar kind of sick, nauseating tension to the feeling of both of those movies. And that movie too, United 93, I think when it came out, and I think I maybe even said this myself in my review of it, had such a narrow view that in a sense it wasn't really about September 11th. It wasn't really about international global terrorism. It was more about how individuals in a workplace deal with an evolving crisis. And this film feels the same way. Whether or not you think that's a irresponsibly narrow framing might be up to the viewer.
I mean, I think it's a valuable framing, because so much of how we think about these really intense living conflicts is from how they're portrayed in the media. So I think it's really fascinating to have a film that keeps its blinders on the journalists so completely, because it does kind of feel like here we are in Germany seeing how the sausage gets made. One of the kind of beats that I like the best in this movie is that everybody's rushing around to get the story, and then they finally get the story in the mouths of the anchor on the TV, and it feels like only in that moment, when somebody else is saying back to them the information they just found, that they're understanding even what they're covering. There's this sense of nobody has a chance to stop and think that, yeah, to Julia's point, feels, I think, really relatable about journalism, about living in any moment. I feel like you could almost see this as a film beyond the scope of journalism, that when we're living in a crisis, we don't really know all of the answers. And there's almost a kind of lovely irony in the fact that it's this very, very bloodless movie that left me with feelings of empathy for people who screw up in the moment, because when it's all happening, who really knows the full scope? When I wrote my review of this, I quoted a line that we have here from one of the journalists. It's actually, they use archival footage of Jim McKay. giving a report in the middle of the film that's like really high stakes. And he has the line, "None of us know what will happen to the course of world history." And that just hit really hard because in that moment, you're right, nobody knows what's going to happen. And I almost feel like this would be a more insincere film if it layered on specifically the time-stamped tensions of like 2024 into a movie where nobody was thinking about that yet.
I also just loved that it showed the mechanics of the work of journalism. And obviously it doesn't take the same mechanics today to do these things, but there's an incredible scene. I mean, it's such a tight movie. It's 90 minutes thereabouts. There's a scene where they need to enlarge photos. Like they've got photos of the hostages from the tiny mug book of athletes that they have for their sports coverage. And they just show, the whole sequence must take 18 seconds, their technician photographing each photograph and enlarging it so that they have a bigger headshot to use on screen or to guide their own thinking and coverage of the story and help them. You know, at one point, they use one of those enlargements to identify a hostage who becomes visible. And you see those photos being taken and you see a swish of one of the images in a dark room. And you just realize the kind of like daily manufacturing and production miracle that news gathering and news coverage was for so much of the 20th century when it was more analog. And I think this movie is very smart. I think that's very thoughtful. It's like you can get lost in the technical work or figuring out how to balance the technical work with the broader sweep of the moment and the moral questions. I think the film is curious about and empathetic to how humans can fail in moments of crisis without really condemning them. And I think that makes it a very intelligent and really interesting movie.
Yeah, I completely agree, Julia. Whatever one's quibbles with the movie's framing might be, in the moment of watching it or in the very tight 90 minutes of watching it, it's a very tense and involving experience. I also feel like we can't close the segment without shouting out John Magaro, who plays the main character, Jeffrey Mason, who's a real person, a young producer who essentially, because of the way things shook down that day and who was on leave and who had a day off, it kind of devolved to him to make a lot of crucial decisions about how to cover this crisis. He's played by John Magaro, who is an actor we've seen recently in Past Lives. A couple of years ago, he was the very patient husband in Past Lives. If you've seen Kelly Reichardt's First Cow, he was also amazing in that. Looking at his filmography, I see actually, funnily enough, that his very first film role was in Munich, another movie about this same crisis. He was a pedestrian. He was an uncredited extra in Steven Spielberg's Munich in 2005. So 20 years later, and maybe in 20 more years, he'll make another movie about the 1972 Olympics. But I love John Magaro, love him in everything. I just now read recently, Amy, maybe you've seen this, that he's in an upcoming movie that was at Sundance called Omaha, in which he plays the lead and is apparently amazing. So John Magaro, keep your eye out for that guy. All right. Well, it's September 5th. It's in theaters right now. It's also nominated for a Best Screenwriting Oscar. I think we're all on the same page that we would send people to see it, no?
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely.
All right. All of that said, let's bring our beloved Stephen Metcalf back on for our next segment. Steve, are you back on the line?
I am back on the line, and I tuned in just in time to hear that I should, totally independent of it being a homework assignment, should go see this movie or will be rewarded for going to see this movie.
Yes. And we should mention that it's coming to streaming. I mean, I think it's PVOD, so you have to buy it, but it's streamable this week. So if listeners are intrigued, they can check it out.
Superb. Once again, thanks a lot, Amy. Really, really great that you could come in and do this. And next time we'll both be on the panel together, I hope.
Oh, my pleasure. Well, for now, I pass the baton and I pass your glasses back to you. Have fun, you guys.
But you're keeping the sweater.
Yeah, keeping the sweater. It's cold.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. During tax season, your personal info travels to a lot of places. Between payroll, your tax consultant, and the IRS. If your W-2 gets exposed, that's just the ticket for identity thieves. That's why LifeLock monitors millions of data points every second. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it guaranteed or your money back. Don't let identity thieves take you for a ride. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are now boarding Group A. Please have your boarding passes ready to scan. If your phone is cracked, old, or was chewed up by your Chihuahua travel companion, please refrain from holding up the line. And instead, simply go to Verizon and trade in any phone in any condition from one of their top brands for the new Samsung Galaxy S25 Plus with Galaxy AI on Unlimited Ultimate and Watch or Tap, also on now.
Service plan required for Watch or Tap. Trade-in and additional terms apply. See Verizon.com for details.
All right. Well, the New York Magazine journalist Brock Collier has written a piece about the, quote, young, confident, and casually cruel Trumpers who, after conquering Washington, have their sights set on America. Let me read a little bit from that piece. This was during inauguration weekend. The piece is substantially a series of reported snapshots on what it was like to be among the young, more hip, I suppose, Trumpers during that weekend. It's easy to see the festivities as an obnoxious victory lap of the MAGA coalition. And of course, they are. Conservatism as a cultural force, not just a political condition, is back in a real way for the first time since the 1980s. Julia, let me start with you. There's sort of the, how would you say, sort of shallow version or a less ambitious version of this piece, which this piece is in one aspect, which is, as I say, just what was it like to go to the parties that were being thrown by the younger Trumpers, MAGA adjacent people in Washington, D.C. during inauguration weekend. And in that sense, series of vivid dioramas of the young fash set, by which I don't mean fashionable. But there's the more ambitious version or the deeper version of the piece, which is that in the kind of is politics downstream from culture, is culture downstream from politics, this is a glimpse into a world in which Trumpism isn't just this lamentable political turn, but is somehow echoing, and there's a reverberant effect between the politics of Trumpism and the culture at large that harkens back to what happened with Reaganism, and in a much broader sense, the 1980s, a real shift in manners that stayed with us for better and for worse ever since. Curious how you reacted to the two aspects of this piece.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons I was eager for us to discuss this actually is to get your perspective, Steve, on the 80s of it all. And I know we'll circle back around to that. But the thing that's culturally perplexing and surprising about the election, its results in this moment, is the young shift to Trump, right? Trump's appeal to the doddering Fox News granddads is something that was widely culturally understood prior to Election Day. The notion that there is a set of kind of discontents among the young, and although most of the people encountered at these parties are white, actually a somewhat multicultural young, is confounding culturally. It does not square with our cultural understanding of the valence of young people for the last several decades. And I think what this piece does that makes it more than a dispiriting set of party dispatches is kind of explore what the appeal is of that and what the vibe is. And the disturbing conclusion it comes to is that essentially part of what's attractive is the freedom to be cruel. And that there had been a cultural sense of you have to watch what you say and be careful and be sensitive and not hurt anybody's feelings and not be offensive and not get canceled. It doesn't overstate this. What I've just said is far more overstated than what the piece suggests pretty elegantly, I think, in the way that it's constructed. But that part of it is a relief and freedom at the ability to be callous to the feelings and experiences of others. And it's so depressing and so disheartening. And I think the part of what's interesting about the piece is that the author kind of experiences that lore themselves and is sort of plays around with that identity a little bit, and then sort of lands at a sick and queasy place and realizes that that's not how they want to be. but the sort of social appeal of callous cruelty is, I don't know, I found it really disheartening and revealing. And I'm curious what you guys made of it, and I'm curious sort of what the analogies are to the cultural tenor of the 80s too. But I'm curious, Dana, did you think it was revealing or?
I mean, it's certainly depressing as hell, and it is a well-reported story in the sense that it's a specific view of a very probably relatively thin in terms of the actual numbers slice of Republican young influencers or alt-right style young influencers that is probably not that reflective of the majority of the Trump electorate, as Brock Collier, the author, acknowledges. I think it is true that the author, Brock Collier, is cherry picking deliberately, in a sense, in order to show this particular thin slice. And maybe a week ago, when this story went viral from New York Magazine, I would have said, that is too specific a world for us to need to bother talking about on the Gabfest. But what's happened in the week since then, right, is that a bunch of unelected Doge incel boys are now taking over the federal government and seizing all the Treasury data. I mean, people from this exact demographic, right? It seems to be like well-off, well-educated, white, Republican, dumbass kids of the exact same slice of humanity that we get a glimpse of in this article. So that I couldn't help but fold that story, which broke since the article was published, into it as I was reading it. This world of kids that are rich enough that, for example, after the inaugural party that is the main subject of the story, the morning after, the reporter goes and visits some of these kids recovering with their hangovers, and some of them are getting saline drips, IVs from an in-house doctor. So it's, that level of wealth and that level of oblivious privilege that you can have somebody come in and cure your hangover with an IV drip. And that in itself, that was just a detail of the story that really stuck with me. So is that something that's illustrative of broader support for Trump? No, but is it illustrative of the people who are actually going to have the power and privilege to get their foot in the door and start dismantling the federal government? Yes, it's exactly those people. So it's pretty chilling to read. One more detail I wanted to note is that in a piece that's very largely about identity politics and about transphobia and about, for example, a lot of jokes at the inaugural party about being so grateful to have men's and women's bathrooms again and all of this. And in the context of all that gender anxiety and transphobia, it just really struck me that there's a moment near the end of the piece where one of the influencers talking to Brock Collier, the reporter who is queer and who uses they, them pronouns, says to another young Republican, this is a queer, but it's a friendly one, right? I mean, it's this moment of really the cruelty is actually turned on the person reporting the story. And I thought that the reporter did a really good job of kind of dropping that moment in without over dramatizing it, but leaving you with the chill that must have left them with.
Yeah, Dana, I agree. I mean, I was fascinated by the article in itself, but also just relative to these preoccupations I can't seem to shed about the 1980s and Reagan and Reaganism and how that represented a major turning point within whose premises we still live. I think the differences between now and then are interesting and worth pointing out up front. The first is that Reaganism, you must never forget, was a return of national affluence and self-confidence off of, multi-decade lows on both scores. And so there was a general sense of triumph and jubilation and a return to health that made Reaganism extend way beyond politics. We're not in that situation now. As to the cruelty of Reaganism, yes, absolutely, there was a seed of cruelty at the heart of Reaganism. For all of Reagan's avuncularity and warmth, all of that was kind of a con job beneath which there was a repudiation of really two idealisms, right? The repudiation of the 60s. The boomers were able to turn back on their former countercultural peacenik selves and become stockbrokers. This is speaking in very broad terms, but it's not entirely untrue. That generation, broadly speaking, did turn to money making. And of the New Deal era, the New Deal era effectively came to an end in 1980 or 1982, right around then. And in its place, it was like a backlash against both of them. The obligation to at least appear idealistic to other people was replaced by a kind of coldness and transactionality. that at its extreme was American Psycho. I mean, the book is absurd and the movie's absurd, but there's a trenchantcy to them because there was a psychosis at the heart of it that Bret Easton Ellis understood and got at the idea that other people are unreal. Only I am real. And that's been there the entire time since the 80s. What I see different here is that basically, you just, as Dana says, you've got a subset of the very well-to-do. I actually think this is a different phenomenon than the incels now raiding the treasury and the code, basically the bits and bytes of the payment system of the United States of America. I think those are the incels and the dweebs that have always been kind of the army behind both Musk and the alt-right. This is different. These are rich kids. I think it's distinctively a rich kid decadence. And what they've done is they've gotten pedigreed at elite or nearly elite colleges where their lifestyle and their sets of beliefs did not go together at all. And so for them, it's like a miniaturized, intensified version of that Reaganistic backlash where they finally get to say what's been on their mind all along and why has it been on their mind all along. They've grown up in bubbles spun by people who've mastered the transactional economy, the other people are not real economy in tech or finance. I'm sure that is a very powerful undercurrent here, and they no longer need to pretend otherwise. What I don't think is that very much exists downstream from this phenomenon. It's important that there's a unapologetic fascist decadence at loose among a subset of the trust fund set. They're repulsive. The idea that that's going to bleed over, Julia, I don't see it at all. It's an interesting anthropological or sociological phenomenon. I don't think it's the germ of a zeitgeist that goes on to swallow up the next 40 years.
Wait, that's interesting. Why not?
Well, for all the reasons. One is that we're at the top of a speculative bubble, not at the very bottom of one this time around. So there's virtually no plausible way we could have the kind of economic performance that we had over the 40 years after 1982 over the next 40 years. I mean, that's just literally mathematically impossible. It won't happen. And the second thing is that America's two countries now. You have an intransigent, at least half of the country that is dead set against what Trump and Trumpism stands for. Reagan won in a landslide. Trump didn't even get to 50% of the vote. There's no mandate behind it exactly. What percentage of the people reading an article like this find it sexy? People read Liar's Poker. You have to go back to like the original iteration of Michael Lewis, nonfiction writer. He got a job as a young man, befuddled young man with no background in finance at Salomon Brothers, which turned out to be the heart of the most central aspect of that Reagan revolution, which was the rise of finance as the profit driver of the American economy, and a way for young white Patrick Batemans to get supremely rich doing literally nothing. And because someone like Lewis, in his bemused way, was able to observe it and make it seem sexy, it reproduced itself and reproduced itself. What is the principle of replication here? There's no career opportunity. There's no bribe from Wall Street. The people who are going into Wall Street and tech are already doing it. None of that's new. That phenomenon is very late in its cycle. It's not at the beginning of it. What is this the beginning of, right? I mean, do you know what it does to my kids, right, who are the age to read something like this and either be turned on or turned off by it? It makes them want to reach for a fucking sharpened spike. It just doesn't. There's the thing, and then there's the echo and the echo and the echo, right? That kind of that like sound waves, concentric waves of sound expanding out like ripples in a pond that turns something into a social phenomenon. I don't see what the medium for that rippling would be here.
That's mildly heartening, despite including references to sharpened spikes.
Right. I'm not saying we're not going to the gulag, but there's a difference between being in a gulag and being like in a ketamine fueled sex party at 8 a.m. talking about how Peter Thiel makes, sense.
And the gulag is preferable.
Yeah, actually, I'd like to make plain. Yes, actually, the gulag. If the gulag is preferable, yes, it is.
Yeah, I mean, neither path looks great. I guess I think you're right that there isn't going to be universal appeal, although even though Reagan was much more popular at the beginning of the 80s than Trump is now. The appeal of Trump continues to be more persistent and more evolving and more widespread than anticipated. And that's what's so ominous and concerning to me about this piece. And there's just a way in which it's about your sense of social self that I thought was really illuminating in this piece. And I think you're right to draw the distinction that the specific kind of tech acolytes of Elon Musk who are doing his work at Doge seem like a slightly sociographically different group than this group, which Brock Collier finds several people who say, I'm just like a normal girl, like I'm a city girl. I'm like, basically it's like I can be cool and be MAGA, which it seems clear in the relief of that there was a sense that you couldn't be young and cool and be MAGA for a while. And there's like a sense of freedom of like, no, I can just be like a normal Republican girly who loves Trump, but also likes espresso martinis and has like a cool apartment in a cool city. You know, like there's sort of this like basic, I don't know, relief, a sense of social relief that they could just have an easy life and not be tarred as a freak for aligning with this political movement. And that, I don't know. I mean, it's also human, right? I mean, your notion of the question of are other people real to you as like the foundational political question is, of course, so astute, and actually maybe part of what we responded to in the Pit, where all the other people are very, very real, right? And I guess maybe it's just easier to believe that other people aren't real. And these people are like reveling in the relief of being told they don't have to worry about it.
They're not freaks to each other. That's the distinction I would make. I think you're absolutely right. Like they now form a cohesive social like milieu within which they can be shameless. And that is something new and is important. It's leakage out beyond like a certain kind of daddy co-signed my lease and Arne Espresso Martini's delicious subset of the urban elites of New York and LA and a few other cities. I don't see that because there are so many ways to be so much fucking cooler than this as a young person in Brooklyn, New York. Like these people are fucking losers. And I still say that in the cities that these people care about, they are still regarded as fucking losers by a significant plurality, if not majority, of their peers.
I mean, I'm going to hang on stubbornly to my connection of this phenomenon with what the Musk's minions are doing in offices right now, even if it's not the same exact sociological slice of people, in that, as you point to, Steve, like this is ultimately kind of an impotent, disempowered group of bratty rich kids, right? Who can think whatever they want within their tiny circles, but they live in this ridiculous bubble. But their wishes are being carried out, and their wishes are being carried out by members of their generation at keyboards in buildings that they've broken into in Washington, right? So this fantastical vision that they have of a wonderful world where you can, call people the R word and use all kinds of slurs, that is being enacted at a federal level, right? With the erasure of DEI programs from entire departments. And so it seems to me that as feverishly stupid as the world seen through the people in this article is, that is in some way the world that we are all being handed to live in right now.
All right. For now, that will be the last word. And this is a story in one way or another we'll be keeping an eye on for years to come, sadly.
Hi, this is Dahlia Lithwick. I host Amicus, Slate's legal podcast, and I wanted to flag our recent episode, Trump's American Takeover.
Americans have this idea that when democracy fails, it's going to fail with tanks in the streets.
Listeners are saying that Professor Kim Lane Shepley gave the single best explanation they have yet heard of how autocracy uses the law to establish itself and what we can do about it. Another listener writes, I think I needed some contextual grounding amidst the maelstrom. Dahlia Lithwick's Amicus podcast was immensely grounding. Not like I have a lot of experience with my government becoming an autocratic hellscape. You and me both, sister, you and me both.
Everything that this administration does now that is bringing down democracy and causing pain should be met with friction. You may not be able to stop it, but you can slow it down.
Listen to Amicus with me, Dahlia Lithwick. Search Amicus wherever you get your podcasts.
All right, now is the moment in our podcast we discuss business. Dana, what do we have this week?
Steve, we have just 2 items of business this week. The first is that, as usual, I will tell you about our Slate Plus bonus segment this week. We're going to talk about the phenomenon of the big light, which has been written about on Slate and elsewhere. The big light being, the main overhead light in a room and people's feelings about using it or not using it. This is one of those phenomena that I hadn't really thought about until it was laid down in an article. And suddenly I realized I do have feelings about the big light, and I bet we all do. So we're going to talk about when you come into a room in your house and you want to illuminate it, do you go around and turn on little lamps, or do you just flick on a switch and have a big glaring overhead light? You can tell how I feel about it already. That will be our Slate Plus segment today. If you're a Slate Plus member, you will get that as a separate segment in your feed. And if you're not a Slate Plus member, you can sign up today at slate.com/cultureplus. When you're a member, you get ad-free podcasts, you get bonus segments like the one I just described, and of course, you get unlimited access to all of the writing and all the podcasting on slate.com. Best of all, you'll be supporting us and the work of our colleagues in keeping the magazine afloat, so these memberships really make a lot of difference. Once again, that's slate.com/cultureplus to subscribe, or you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify by clicking Try Free at the top of our show page. Second announcement, we are still receiving applications, and this is going to be the last call for them, for our next production assistant. Our wonderful production assistant, Kat Hong, sadly had to leave and move on to another job, but that leaves a great opening for you. If you're interested in helping us research each episode, come up with topic ideas, help our producer publish the episode, generally be a behind-the-scenes gal, guy, person Friday, we would love to hear from you. This job is about a 10 to 15 hour a week commitment, depending on what we're covering. If it sounds like something that you would have time to do, would be interested in doing, and would be good at doing, please email us at culturegabfestassistant@gmail.com. In that email, please send a cover note about who you are and what you're doing, along with 2 ideas of things you think we should cover on a future show. The subject line of your email should include the letters PA so that we can separate it from the other listener emails and get you in the queue for considering your application. All right, back to you, Steve.
All right, now is the moment in our podcast when we endorse Dana. What do you have?
All right, well, because once in a while I like to do endorsements that are just sort of beautiful moments, like little nature things or something that sort of takes you outside of culture into a peaceful brain space for a moment. I am going to endorse a 59-second clip of howling wolves in Manitoba, Canada. I heard this on Blue Sky. I follow a lot of sort of nature writers and ecologists and things like that on Blue Sky, precisely so that I can have these moments of like someone saw an incredible bird or, a starling murmuration or something cool like that. So there's this woman, Dr. Heather Hynum. She lives in Manitoba. She's an ecologist and I think a nature writer. I only know her through her Blue Sky account, but she posted a 1-minute video of the wolves howling outside her house in Manitoba. And I'll just read the text that went along with it. She says, "The wolves were singing tonight. A few seconds in, you'll hear the closest howling wolf I've ever heard. I couldn't see it, but it might have been at the end of my driveway. I went right back inside after this." And you can understand why she went right back inside when you hear how close this pack of howling wolves are. But it is such a beautiful musical sound. I had never sort of heard full-on howling wolves in nature before. And I kept on going back to listen to it again and again, just for a brain cleanse. And as somebody commented under the post, which I thought was such a wise observation, they said there's something about hearing this sound that humans, Homo sapiens has been hearing for so many thousands of years, and that we domesticated a whole species from, but sort of hearing it in the raw is such a unique feeling, especially if you've got a pet sitting there in the house. You look over at your curly little doodle and think that's a descendant of what I'm listening to right now. So maybe we can drop in just a few seconds of howling wolves in Manitoba, and we'll put a link to the Blue Sky post so people can listen.
Julia, what do you got?
I feel like my endorsement might make both of you poke your eyes out, so apologies in advance. But I came across an interesting story on a site called signs.com called Branded in Memory, which is about the degree to which corporate logos in America have infiltrated all of our brains. And they basically asked 156 Americans to draw logos from memory to see whether you actually know in your head and heart, like what the Target logo is, what the Starbucks logo is, etc. So it's an interesting analysis, and you can see all the drawings. And then if you also go to this site called neil.fun/logos from memory, you can test your own ability to draw the McDonald's logo, the Nike logo, the Apple logo. And it's just like an interesting little interactive experiment in how branded our brains are. It's both a relief to realize we don't all have the ability to replicate them perfectly, and also depressing that we basically have the general idea. Starbucks, Green Mermaid Lady in some shape or other. And I don't know, the interactivity makes it kind of an interesting way to explore our own relationship to brands.
Oh, that's cool. And I mean, it's just sad to think that through no fault of their own, right? Like your average American can draw the Exxon or the Starbucks, but can they name the three branches of government or the Supreme Court justice?
Or what if you just ask them to draw like 5 basic American birds?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to confess something, first of all, which is I snuck back at the beginning of the invasion of Ukraine. I snuck back onto Twitter with an anonymous account, literally just to follow what were the 10 or 20, many of which were boots on the ground Ukrainian citizens, but just to follow the reporting of the war. I then X'd out of that account after a few months. I've snuck back onto Blue Sky. I have no desire. I would never post. I'm not active. Don't follow me. But I snuck back on because, I mean, how can you not try to understand what's happening, at least on a daily basis? And what I've discovered is, Dana, you were right. Like, Blue Sky is a remarkable resource and community, and it's not yet infected by bot and porn bots and Elon Musk's viruses, various viruses. But something has become clear over the last few days, which is that the legacy media is not covering Musk and Doge and their infiltration of the federal government's computer systems with anything like the verve or granularity that it deserves. But Wired, the magazine Wired, is on it and breaking news. They have a whole bunch of reporters doing unbelievable, groundbreaking, like story-breaking work on almost hour by hour basis on what Musk is up to and the constitutional crisis that we are now firmly within. So I endorse this week wholeheartedly. If you can stomach it and you want to go back on social media, or if you're already on Blue Sky, getting the Wired starter pack of their reporters, your feed will suddenly have all of this information coming at you. It's dismaying, but you've got to look at it in the face. And doing what I did, which was subscribe to Wired. It's really cheap, and you're funding cutting edge and really extraordinary journalism by doing so. So, Julia, thank you so much.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, Dana.
It was a pleasure.
You'll find links to some of the things we talked about today at our show page. That's slate.com/culturefest. And you can email us at culturefest@slate.com. Our introductory music is by the composer Nicholas Patel. Our producer and our production assistant is one person right now, the redoubtable Vic Whitley-Berry. For Dana Stevens and Julia Turner, I'm Stephen Metcalf. Thank you so much for joining us. We will see you soon.